Sophia Turner pressed her back against the cold wall of the university dormitory room, her hands trembling, as she scrolled through the hospital's message on her phone. The words blurred before her eyes, but their meaning cut through her like a blade. Her mother, Helen Turner, had collapsed earlier that morning and had been rushed to the intensive care unit. The doctor's voice echoed in her head, a stern reminder of reality. The surgery is urgent. Without it, her heart will not last. The cost is $100,000, and it must be paid within a week. Sophia stared at the screen, her pulse hammering. Her entire body felt hollow, as if the weight of the world had settled on her frail shoulders. $100,000 might as well have been $1 billion. She barely made enough to eat, let alone carry the price of a miracle. The dormitory was dark. A single lamp cast a weak glow over the scattered textbooks, empty ramen cups, and wrinkled uniforms that marked her daily struggle. Outside laughter drifted across the campus courtyard. Students were celebrating the end of exams, their carefree voices piercing the fragile silence of her world. Sophia lowered her head into her hands, pressing her palms against her tear-streaked cheeks. She had fought so hard to keep everything together, to study, to work, to smile for her mother, but this was the one wall she could not climb. She whispered into the emptiness, "Please, God, do not take her. She is all I have." On the other side of the city, Adrian Cole stepped out of a sleek black car in front of a towering glass skyscraper that bore his family name. At 28, he was the youngest CEO in the history of Cole Enterprises, a man both feared and admired in the ruthless world of business. His sharp suits and sharper eyes carried an authority that silenced boardrooms. His empire stretched across continents, and yet his heart remained unreadable, hidden behind layers of discipline and control. Adrian walked into the marble lobby with a stride that echoed confidence and detachment. Every head turned, every whisper followed, but he noticed none of it. To the public, he was the perfect symbol of success. To those who tried to know him, he was a storm locked behind glass. Two lives separated by wealth, power, and circumstance, moved closer without knowing it. Sophia desperate to save the only family she had left, and Adrian the billionaire, whose name opened doors and crushed rivals alike, were about to collide in a way that neither could predict. Her world was crumbling, his world was untouchable, and yet fate had already begun to weave their threads together. One night with him could mean her mother's life, but the price of that night would be far greater than money. It would cost her innocence, her pride, and perhaps her heart. Sophia Turner's days began before the sun and ended long after it disappeared, each hour a battle to survive. At dawn, she worked as a waitress in a small cafe where the smell of burnt coffee clung to her clothes. The customers rarely looked her in the eye, and the tips were barely enough to cover instant noodles. After classes, she hurried to tutor children from wealthier families who sometimes mocked her second-hand shoes, but whose parents paid just enough to keep her going. At night, she played piano in a dimly lit lounge, her fingers pressing worn keys that echoed music she no longer felt in her heart. Each job was a thread holding her fragile life together, and every paycheck was already spent before it arrived. On campus, she lived in the shadows of privilege. Other students carried sleek laptops, designer bags, and the perfume of comfort. Sophia carried old notebooks patched with tape and the weight of unpaid bills. Whispers followed her in hallways. Poor girl, always working, always tired. She never replied. She swallowed the humiliation and smiled faintly, pretending the words could not pierce her. But late at night, when she sat alone in her room with a cup of cheap instant ramen, the loneliness wrapped around her like a chain. She dreamed of what it would feel like to eat, without counting coins, to study, without worrying if tomorrow she would be forced to leave because of unpaid tuition. Her mother was the only reason she kept fighting. Helen Turner had raised her alone after her father's death and had given Sophia every ounce of love she had. Even in sickness, Helen would smile and tell her, "Do not give up, sweetheart. Life is hard, but you are stronger." Sophia believed those words and lived by them. The bond between them was unbreakable, stronger than hunger, stronger than despair. Every sacrifice Sophia made was for her mother's smile. But now that smile was fading in a hospital bed. The thought clawed at Sophia's chest until it hurt to breathe. One afternoon during a lecture, exhaustion finally conquered her. She had worked a double shift the night before and skipped breakfast to pay for her mother's medication. Her body wavered. The professor's voice became a distant echo. Students around her chuckled softly as her pen slipped from her fingers. Then her vision blurred and she collapsed against the desk. Gasps filled the room. For a moment she heard someone say her name, but darkness pulled her under. When she opened her eyes, she was lying in the nurse's office, a damp cloth on her forehead. The nurse shook her head with quiet disapproval. "You fainted from exhaustion and malnutrition. You cannot keep this up." Sophia forced a weak smile. "I will be fine." But deep inside, she knew she was breaking. Still, she refused to stop. She could not stop, because stopping meant giving up on her mother, and that was unthinkable. The world might call her poor girl, but she would rather be poor than heartless. What she did not yet know was that her relentless fight to survive had already drawn the attention of someone whose world was the exact opposite of hers, someone whose eyes had lingered on her longer than she realized. The lecture hall was buzzing with restless energy when the tall doors opened and silence spread like a wave. Adrian Cole stepped inside, his tailored navy suit catching the sterile light, his presence commanding instant attention. Professors hurried to greet him, students whispered his name with awe. He was not a man anyone expected to see on a campus yet. Here he was, the billionaire CEO, whose face often appeared in financial magazines. He carried himself with a quiet authority, every step measured, every glance sharp. He was young, impossibly successful, and untouchable. For most of the students, this was a chance of a lifetime to hear from a man who had conquered industries before the age of 30. They leaned forward, eager, their notebooks ready. But at the back of the hall, Sophia sat hunched over her hair, falling across her tired face. Her pen trembled in her hand as she tried to focus, but the words blurred. Her stomach was empty, her head heavy, and her heart carried the crushing weight of hospital bills. She did not care that a billionaire had entered the room. She only cared that her mother might not live long enough for her to pay the debt that stood between them and hope. Adrian's gaze swept across the room as he reached the podium. His voice was deep and steady as he began to speak about leadership and global markets. He spoke of vision, of risk, of power. Every student clung to his words, intoxicated by the aura of wealth. Yet as he scanned the room, his eyes paused briefly. There was a girl in the last row, frail, pale, fighting to stay upright. She did not look at him the way others did. She did not seem impressed or starstruck. She looked as if she was fighting to breathe. The moment passed, but something in her posture lingered in his thoughts. After the lecture ended and the hall emptied, Adrian stepped into the corridor. His assistant handed him documents, but his focus drifted when he heard a muffled sound nearby. He slowed his steps. Around the corner, half hidden by the shadows, Sophia leaned against the wall with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice shook as she whispered to the hospital, "Please, I am begging you, give me more time. The surgery is everything. My mother will die without it. I can find a way to pay. I just need more time." A pause, then the harsh reply from the other end carried loud enough for Adrian to catch. "We cannot hold the operating room without a deposit. $100,000. 1 week. That is final." Sophia's shoulders slumped. She covered her mouth to silence a sob, her entire frame trembling. Adrian stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing. He had heard desperation before in negotiations, but never like this. This was not business. This was survival. He should have walked away. He had no reason to care. Yet something kept him rooted to the spot, listening to the girl with tired eyes plead for her mother's life, in a world that offered her none of its mercy. The piano lounge smelled of polished wood and faint perfume, its low lights casting a soft glow over red leather chairs and crystal glasses. Music drifted gently through the room, not from a recording, but from a fragile young woman seated at the upright piano in the corner. Her name was Sophia Turner, though few of the patrons cared. To them she was background music, a shadow filling silence with melody. Her hands moved across the keys with practiced grace, but her fingers trembled and her eyes carried exhaustion. She was playing for her mother's life, though no one in the lounge knew it. Adrian Cole entered quietly, accompanied by 2 business partners, who immediately drew attention, their laughter commanding waiters and guests alike. But Adrian did not follow them to the bar. His eyes had already locked on the girl at the piano. He recognized her. The poor student from the lecture hall, the girl who had collapsed under the weight of hunger, the same girl he had overheard begging the hospital for more time. Now she sat in a borrowed black dress, her back straight, her music steady, though the shadows beneath her eyes betrayed the truth. He moved closer, his polished shoes clicking against the floor, until he stood beside the piano. Sophia stiffened her fingers, stumbling over a note when she realized who was watching her. She whispered under her breath, "Please, not here, not now," but forced herself to continue playing. Adrian waited until the final chord faded. "You work here," he said simply, his voice low and calm. She did not look at him. "I work everywhere I can," she replied. Her words clipped her pride, a thin shield. He studied her in silence for a moment before asking, "Why do you push yourself like this? You are collapsing in classrooms, and still you sit here playing into the night." Her hands froze on the keys. For a long time she said nothing, but the weight of his gaze pressed against her steady and unrelenting. Finally she whispered, "Because if I stop, she dies. My mother needs surgery. It costs $100,000. If I cannot pay, I lose her." Adrian's jaw tightened. The lounge around them buzzed with laughter and glasses clinking. But for him, the world had narrowed to the trembling girl who would rather break herself than surrender. He leaned closer, his voice quiet but edged with certainty. "One night with me, I will give you $100,000. Sophia's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Then rage flushed her face. What did you just say? He did not flinch. You heard me. One night, your problem disappears. She stood abruptly, the bench screeching against the floor. How dare you? Do you think money buys everything? Do you think I am so desperate I would sell myself? Her voice shook with fury, but her hands trembled even more. Patrons turned to look, whispering. Adrian remained calm, his gaze steady. You said your mother will die. I am offering you a way to save her. Sophia's throat tightened, humiliation burning hotter than her anger. She grabbed her bag, stormed past him, her heels clattering across the polished floor. Outside the lounge, she gasped for air, her chest aching. Tears pricked her eyes as she muttered to herself, I will never sink that low. I will find another way. Yet as she stumbled into the night air, her phone buzzed again. The hospital. The voice on the other end was sharp. Miss Turner, the deadline is approaching. Without payment, your mother's surgery will be cancelled. You must decide. She hung up her legs, weak beneath her. In the reflection of the street window, she saw her pale face, the hopeless girl staring back at her. Images of her mother in the hospital bed flashed before her. The tubes, the machines, the smile that was fading. She pressed her hand against her mouth, whispering, What choice do I have? For hours she walked the city streets, torn between pride and desperation. Each step echoed the same thought. If I do nothing, I lose her. If I accept him, I lose myself. By dawn, her eyes were swollen from crying. She returned to the lounge where the night had ended in fury. Adrian was still there, seated in the shadows as if he had known she would return. She froze, her heart pounding. He rose and approached her, his expression unreadable. You came back, he said softly. She swallowed, her voice breaking. I do not have a choice. The city glimmered beneath a velvet sky as Adrian's black car carried Sophia away from the familiar streets of her fragile world. She sat rigid in the leather seat, her hands clenched tightly in her lap, her gaze fixed on the blur of neon lights rushing past the window. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to throw open the door and flee. But the thought of her mother lying pale and helpless in the hospital bound her to that seat. Adrian sat beside her, silent, his profile sharp in the dim glow of the dashboard. He looked every bit the untouchable man she had seen in magazines, yet here he was, inches from her woe, offering salvation at a price she could barely comprehend. The car pulled up in front of a towering glass building, its windows reflecting the stars. Inside the penthouse, everything sparkled. Chandeliers spilled golden light across polished marble floors, walls adorned with art worth more than Sophia had ever seen in her life. She stepped inside hesitantly, her worn shoes squeaking against the pristine tiles. The contrast struck her like a blow. She felt like a shadow intruding into a world built of power and perfection. Adrian watched her with quiet intensity, his expression unreadable. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if to shield her pride from the cold luxury surrounding her. He gestured toward the wide window where the city stretched endlessly below. This is the world I built, he said evenly. Tonight it is yours. She turned to him sharply. Do not pretend this is a gift. You are buying me. He did not deny it. I am buying your time. What you choose to do with it is yours. His calm tone unsettled her more than anger would have. She moved to the bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink, as her reflection stared back at her. Her lips trembled, her eyes swollen from days of tears. She whispered to herself one night for her life, just one night. When she stepped out, she wore one of his crisp white shirts that hung loosely on her slender frame. Adrian's eyes flickered briefly, a softness breaking through his mask. "That is mine," he remarked, his voice quieter. "My dress was ruined," she muttered, tugging at the hem. He approached, closing the space between them. His gaze searched her face, lingering on the fear and defiance battling in her eyes. "How much do you want?" he asked suddenly. "I can give you more than 100,000. Sophia's eyes widened with panic. "No, do not insult me. I will take what was agreed, nothing more." For the first time, Adrian's composure wavered. He studied her, as if trying to decipher why she clung so fiercely to her dignity when she had already sacrificed so much. "If you are uncomfortable, you can leave," he said softly. "I will not force you." Her heart pounded. His words should have freed her, but the image of her mother's failing heart anchored her in place. "I am not uncomfortable," she whispered, though her voice betrayed her. "I will stay." Silence settled thickly between them. Then, almost reluctantly, Adrian lifted his hand to tilt her chin upward. His touch was warm, steady, commanding, yet gentle. He lowered his lips to hers, a kiss that began as a transaction but deepened with unexpected heat. Sophia froze, her body rigid, her pride clawing to resist. Yet as his mouth moved against hers, something inside her cracked. The warmth she had been starved of, the closeness she had long buried, surged through her veins. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of his shirt, returning the kiss with shy uncertainty. Adrian pulled her closer, his control slipping. For him, this was meant to be business. Nothing more but the taste of her innocence stirred something he had not felt in years. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her to the wide bed, draped in silk sheets. Sophia's heart raced, shame and desperation colliding with a fragile yearning she could not silence. Tears pricked her eyes as she whispered, "Forgive me, Mom. I am doing this for you." The night unfolded in silence, broken only by the rhythm of hearts and breaths tangled in shadows. Sophia gave herself not to passion, but to necessity. Yet beneath her fear flickered a spark of tenderness neither of them expected. Hours slipped by like fragments of a dream. When dawn broke, pale light spilled through the vast windows. Sophia stirred, disoriented, the silk sheets cool against her skin. She turned her head and saw Adrian standing by the balcony, already dressed, his posture composed as if the night had meant nothing. Reality rushed back. Shame burned her cheeks as she quickly gathered her clothes. She buttoned the shirt tightly around her, her fingers trembling. "I should go," she whispered. "I have class. I have work." Adrian turned, his gaze steady. "You are leaving without breakfast. You are still weak." She shook her head firmly. "This was a transaction. It is over." His eyes narrowed slightly, but he did not stop her. Sophia clutched her bag and hurried toward the door, each step heavy with the weight of what she had given away. In her mind, she repeated the vow again and again. It was only one night. I will forget it. I must. Yet as she stepped into the elevator, her chest tightened with a pain. She could not name a pain that whispered the truth she refused to admit. That night had already changed everything. The hospital corridors smelled of antiseptic and fear when Sophia arrived the next day. Her legs trembled as she walked toward the billing office, ready to beg for more time. But before she could speak, The clerk smiled and handed her a receipt. "The surgery has been covered in full," she said warmly. "Your mother is already in the operating room." Relief crashed over Sophia so strongly that her knees almost buckled. She clutched the paper with trembling hands, tears burning her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, though she had no idea whom she was thanking. She knew, of course, only one man could have done it. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall and let herself cry in silence, gratitude, and humiliation warring inside her. Days later, Helen was moved to recovery. Her chest rose and fell steadily, her skin no longer the pale gray of despair. Sophia held her mother's hand and whispered, "You are safe now, Mom. I kept my promise." Yet in her heart she felt hollow. She had saved her mother's life, but lost something she could never reclaim. Back on campus, whispers traveled faster than wind. Students leaned against lockers, their voices coated with mockery. "Did you hear the poor girl has a billionaire sponsor? I wonder what she gave him in return." Some laughed openly, pointing at her worn clothes. She probably sold herself for tuition. Sophia kept her head down her cheeks, burning her nails digging into her palms. She refused to answer. Pride demanded silence, but silence did not stop the sting of their words. The cruelest came from Isabella Reed, daughter of a senator and known campus queen. With her perfect hair and designer dress, she cornered Sophia outside the lecture hall. "So you are the charity case Adrian Cole picked up?" Isabella sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you think wearing his money makes you special? You will never belong in his world." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Sophia's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin, her voice low. "I do not need to belong to your world. I only need to save mine." Isabella smirked, her eyes glinting with cruelty. "Poor girls like you always think love is charity. You will see what happens when he grows bored." Sophia walked away quickly, her heart pounding her body, trembling, but her words clung to her like poison. That evening, she sat alone in the library, forcing herself to focus on textbooks. Though the words swam on the page, the sound of footsteps drew closer. She froze when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Sophia." She turned slowly. Adrian stood in the aisle, tall, immaculate, in his dark suit, his presence impossible to ignore. Students nearby whispered excitedly, "What is he doing here? Why is he looking at her?" Sophia's stomach dropped. He was not supposed to come back. He had told her it would only be one night, only one deal. Yet here he was, his eyes locked on hers, as if she was the only person in the room. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady her breath. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice tight. He did not look away. "Because you did not answer my calls, because I am not finished with you." Sophia's chest constricted. She shook her head quickly, panic rising. "No, we had an agreement. It is over." Adrian stepped closer, his expression unreadable, but his voice firm. "It will not be over until I say it is." Sophia avoided Adrian for days, ducking into crowded hallways, slipping out of classrooms before he could reach her. But his shadow seemed to follow her everywhere. Each time she thought she had escaped, she would find him leaning against a corridor wall, watching silently, or standing near the library steps, as if waiting for her. She felt trapped between fury and fear, ashamed of the truth, yet unable to erase it. One afternoon, she returned to the hospital to visit her mother, only to be told her outstanding bills had been paid again. Not just the surgery, but the entire recovery plan, weeks of medication and private care. Sophia froze, her heart pounding with rage. She stormed out of the hospital and nearly collided with Adrian, who was standing near his car. "You," she hissed, her eyes blazing. "Why are you doing this?" He met her fury calmly. "Because you need it. Because she needs it." Sophia clenched her fists, her voice breaking. "Do you think I am some project you can fix with money? Do you think you can buy my pride, my life?" Adrian's gaze softened slightly, though his tone remained firm. "This is not charity. I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot walk away." Her breath caught a painful knot forming in her chest. Do not say that she whispered, her eyes wet. "You do not know what you are doing to me." She turned quickly, determined to escape before he saw her tears, but his voice followed her. "Sophia, this is more than a deal." She did not look back. In class the next morning, the whispers grew louder. Students had seen Adrian's car outside the hospital, had seen him walking with her. They muttered cruel names under their breath: mistress, gold digger, opportunist. Sophia sat stiffly, her nails biting into her palms. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Isabella smirked from across the room, her triumphant eyes promising more humiliation. After the lecture ended, Sophia packed her books quickly, but before she could leave, Adrian appeared in the doorway. Students fell silent as he called her name. "Sophia." His voice carried across the room. Her heart sank. She could feel everyone's eyes on her, judging, mocking. She forced herself to walk past him without speaking, but he reached out his hand, brushing her arm. "Meet me tonight," he said quietly, his voice low enough for only her. She jerked away, her chest heaving. "No," she snapped, "this has to stop." For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes, but it faded into something else, something almost vulnerable. Then he stepped aside, letting her pass. Sophia hurried away, her body trembling. She knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of a storm neither of them could control. Sophia finished her piano shift late one evening, her body aching from hours of playing and her mind clouded with exhaustion. She stepped into the cool night air, clutching her worn bag close to her chest. Relieved for a moment that the world was quiet. But as she turned down the narrow street behind the lounge, a van screeched to a halt beside her. The door slid open before she could scream, and rough hands grabbed her, pulling her inside. A cloth pressed against her mouth, the stench of chemicals filling her lungs, and darkness swallowed her. When she awoke, her wrists were bound, and the dim room smelled of sweat and fear. She was not alone. Several other young women sat huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. Whispers filled the air. "They are going to sell us." Sophia's stomach twisted violently. Her heart pounded as heavy footsteps echoed down the hall. The door burst open, and masked men barked orders, dragging the women into a larger chamber lit by harsh white lights. Sophia stumbled forward, her legs weak, until she stood under the gaze of strangers seated behind polished tables. An auctioneer's voice rang out cold and merciless, fresh, young. "We start at $500,000. Numbers rose quickly, the bids climbing as Sophia's vision blurred with horror. She tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. 1 million. 1.5. 2. The crowd roared with greedy energy. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow, until suddenly a calm, commanding voice cut through the noise. 3 million. Silence fell. Every head turned toward the source. Adrian Cole stood at the back of the room, his tall figure unmistakable. His dark suit immaculate, his eyes blazing with fury. The auctioneer hesitated, then slammed the gavel. "Sold." Moments later, chaos erupted as Adrian's bodyguards stormed the chamber, shoving the masked men aside. Hands freed Sophia from her bindings and guided her out through a hidden passage. She stumbled into a quiet lounge, her knees buckling, as the night's terror threatened to crush her. And then she saw him. Adrian crossed the room in long strides, his face carved with storm and relief. He caught her trembling form against his chest, his grip firm and steady. "You are safe now," he whispered, his voice raw. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she clutched his jacket. "You paid $3 million for me," she sobbed. He looked into her eyes, his own filled with something deeper than rage. "I would have paid more," he said simply. "For you, I would pay the world." Sophia's throat tightened. Gratitude and fear collided inside her. She wanted to push him away, to scream at him for dragging her into a world where such horrors existed, but her body betrayed her. She leaned into his warmth, allowing herself for one fleeting moment to feel safe. Adrian stroked her hair, his voice low. "Michael is behind this. He has been my rival for years, waiting for weakness. He saw you and he struck." Sophia shivered at the name. "So it was never about me," she whispered bitterly. "I was just a weapon to hurt you." Adrian's jaw tightened. "That does not change what you mean to me." She pulled back, her eyes filled with anguish. "That is exactly why I cannot stay near you. Your world is poison. If being close to you puts my life at risk, then I need to leave." Her words cracked, but her resolve stood firm. She turned, her tears blurring the golden light of the lounge, and walked away. Adrian stood frozen, his hands clenched at his sides, his heart roaring with the fear that this time she meant it. Days passed, but Sophia could not erase the memory of the abduction or the way Adrian had appeared like a storm to rescue her. She threw herself into caring for her mother, spending long hours by Helen's bedside. As she slowly recovered from surgery, one afternoon, while changing the water in the flowers on the windowsill, Sophia overheard two nurses talking just outside the door. "Did you know one of the benefactors of this hospital used to be treated here years ago?" the first nurse said. "His father was very sick, and there was a young nurse who worked tirelessly for him." The second nurse nodded, her voice soft. Her name was Helen Turner, if I remember correctly. Sophia froze the vase, nearly slipping from her hands. She rushed into the corridor and confronted the nurses. "What did you just say?" They exchanged surprised looks before repeating Helen Turner. "Yes, she was a nurse here many years ago. She saved lives when no one else would, including Adrian Cole's father." Sophia's chest tightened painfully. She stumbled back into the room, her thoughts spinning. That evening, Adrian appeared at the hospital, his presence filling the quiet hallway. Sophia glared at him, still torn between gratitude and fear. "Why are you here again?" she asked bitterly. "You should let me go." He met her eyes, his voice lower than she had ever heard. "Because I found something you need to know." He handed her an old file. With trembling fingers, she opened it and saw the truth. Helen Turner had been the private nurse assigned to Adrian's father in his final days. More than that, there was a note written in the late man's own hand. "She saved my son's life during the accident. Never forget this debt." Sophia gasped. Memory flickered in Adrian's eyes as he spoke. "I was only a child, but I remember falling into the lake near our estate. I was drowning. It was your mother who pulled me out." "Your mother saved me, Sophia." Her eyes filled with tears, her body shaking. "All this time," she whispered, "we were connected." Adrian's voice cracked for the first time. That is why I felt I knew you the moment I saw you. It was not chance, it was fate. Sophia pressed her hands to her face, overwhelmed. She wanted to deny it, to escape the destiny unfolding before her, but the truth wrapped around her heart like a chain she could not break. The revelation about her mother haunted Sophia for nights. She wandered the hospital corridors, unable to sleep, torn between gratitude for Adrian's past and terror of what his presence meant for her future. She told herself again and again that she could not afford to be tangled with him, that his world was too powerful, too ruthless, but the pull was undeniable. When Helen finally grew strong enough to sit up in bed, she looked at her daughter with weary yet knowing eyes. "Sophia," she said softly, "sometimes fate does not ask permission. Sometimes it simply brings two people together because it must." Sophia shook her head, tears in her eyes. "But Mom, his family will never accept me. His life will destroy mine." Helen squeezed her hand. "Love is never safe, but neither is life." Days later, Sophia made her decision. She wrote a note to Adrian, simple and final. "Thank you for everything, but I cannot be part of your world. Please let me go." She left it with the nurse and disappeared from campus, choosing instead to work double shifts to pay the smaller bills that remained. She thought distance would protect her heart, but whispers followed her still. Isabella Reed fueled them, flaunting her presence beside Adrian at public events, posting photographs. In glittering gowns, her smile sharp as a blade. Rumors spread that a marriage was being arranged between Adrian and Isabella, uniting wealth and politics in a match designed for power. Sophia told herself she did not care, but each headline cut deeper than the last. Then came the day of the charity gala, one of the largest events of the season. The ballroom overflowed with dignitaries, businessmen, and cameras flashing like lightning. Sophia watched from the street outside, drawn by a pain she could not suppress. Through the glass windows, she saw Adrian in his black suit, Isabella on his arm, dazzling in red. They laughed together under chandeliers while the world watched. Sophia turned to leave, her chest aching when a murmur rose inside the ballroom. Adrian had stepped onto the stage, adjusting the microphone with steady hands. "Thank you all for coming." His voice carried rich and commanding. "Tonight I have an announcement." The crowd hushed. Whispers of engagement swirled. Isabella's smile widened as if expecting her triumph. Adrian's gaze swept across the sea of faces, but his voice was sharp as steel. "For weeks there have been rumors about my future, about a marriage arranged for influence and wealth. Let me make this clear. I will not marry Isabella Reed." Gasps echoed through the hall, cameras flashing wildly. Isabella's face blanched, her smile collapsing into fury. Adrian continued, his voice deep and unwavering. "I do not care for politics or power without love. There is only one woman I will spend my life with. Her name is Sophia Turner. She is the woman I love." The room erupted into chaos. Some applauded, others shouted questions. Isabella stormed from the stage, her heels striking the floor like gunshots. Outside on the street, Sophia stood, frozen, her heart racing, tears streaming down her cheeks. He had said her name in front of the world. Minutes later, the ballroom doors burst open, and Adrian strode into the night, searching. His eyes found her under the street lamp, trembling, stunned. He walked toward her with determined steps, ignoring the cameras that followed. When he reached her, he took her hand firmly. "No more running," he said, his voice fierce. "You are mine and I am yours. Nothing else matters." Sophia's lips parted, her breath unsteady. "But your family," she whispered, "they will never accept me." His mother appeared at the doorway of the ballroom, her face pale with shock, but Adrian did not falter. He pulled Sophia closer, his eyes blazing with conviction. "Then they will learn, because I will never let you go." The weeks after the gala unfolded like a storm slowly breaking into sunlight. Sophia returned each day to the hospital, where Helen grew stronger, her cheeks filling with color, her laughter returning in fragments. Doctors called it remarkable, a recovery beyond expectation. Sophia sat by her side, relief softening her weary heart. One morning, as she fed her mother soup, Helen caught her wrist and whispered, "Do not hide from happiness, Sophia. Life has tested you enough. When love comes, you must let it heal you." Sophia pressed her forehead against her mother's hand, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Later that evening, Adrian invited her to a private dinner above the city. The restaurant sparkled with candlelight violins whispering in the background. Sophia wore a simple dress borrowed from a friend, yet in Adrian's eyes she was radiant. He poured her water himself, a gesture that startled her more than the diamonds glittering on the table around them. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly, her voice unsteady. "Why me?" Adrian set his glass down and rose from his chair. "Because you are my beginning and my end," he said. "You were there in my past through your mother's kindness. You are in my present through fate's cruelty, and I want you in my future by choice." He knelt before her, a velvet box in his hand, the world around them pausing, as he looked up at her with a rare vulnerability. "You were my sacrifice, my fate, my healing. Will you marry me?" Sophia's hands flew to her mouth, her breath catching as tears blurred her vision. She had imagined this moment in dreams, but dreams had never carried such weight. She nodded through her tears. "Yes, Adrian, I will." Applause erupted in the restaurant, strangers celebrating their union as he slipped the ring onto her trembling finger and pulled her into his embrace. Their kiss was tender yet fierce, a promise sealed not by money or desperation, but by love. Weeks later, Helen attended their small ceremony, her smile brighter than the flowers that filled the chapel. As she watched her daughter walk down the aisle toward the man who had once been untouchable, she whispered to herself, "Thank you for giving her the happiness I could not." Adrian held Sophia's hands as vows were exchanged. His voice steadied hers, breaking with emotion. They were no longer billionaire and poor student, no longer two worlds colliding, but two souls who had survived fire and chosen to heal together. When the final words were spoken and the kiss sealed their bond, Sophia closed her eyes and felt the weight of the past lift. She had lived through hunger, humiliation, and heartbreak, but she had also discovered that love born in pain could still heal, could still conquer. And as Adrian's arms wrapped around her steady and sure, she finally believed she had found home.